So some of my most popular videos to date have been the series where I looked at the 5 best dungeons to solo in Classic WoW based upon your class, and I thought it was about time I updated it for TBC. So today we're going to dive into it with the Rogue. Now for anyone who didn't watch the original Classic video, this is a very straightforward concept for the video in that I will be looking at the 5 best dungeons for making gold that you can solo depending on your class, today the Rogue. However, I will be looking primarily at using dungeons that do not require to have particular professions. I will mention professions that will make more gold if you have them for these farms, but these farms will be weighted towards using any form of class mechanic available to every person of that class, such as with the Rogue, our lockpicking or our pickpocketing, as well as hopefully, while we aren't going to have a restriction on gear level requirements, we will be putting priority in this listing towards the dungeons that do not necessarily have a particularly steep gear curve in order to be able to participate. But with all of that out of the way, let's dive in at number 5. So coming in at number 5, we're going to have Steam Vaults. Now, Steam Vaults actually offers one of the best returns per run for any of the dungeons that we're going to discuss today. However, it has a few serious cons to this farm as well. So in terms of the pros, you are going to find that there are a lot of nodes here if you have herbalism or mining. The majority of the mobs are going to be humanoid and pickpocketable for decent money, and there is also going to be multiple chest spawns, which to my understanding, all apart from one in the first room, are attainable. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't come without a cost, and in the case of Steam Vaults, it's actually quite a few different costs. Most notably is going to be the difficulty of the farm, which is why it's coming in at last place alone, never mind the other cons, in the sense that Steam Vaults is actually going to be technically available to any rogue, but you are going to be limited by your talent spec and your gear requirements. You aren't necessarily going to have those things in order to be able to get something from this farm, but in order to make it worthwhile for the amount of time that it takes and how difficult it is to achieve, you are going to want to be of a particularly good gold farming spec, such as the general PvP specs that rogues run for arenas, or you are going to need to be extremely geared, and it's also quite fussy in terms of the fact that there are lots of pulling of mobs and then kiting them using jumping off of things mechanics and the alternate pathing that mobs will take. It's very fiddly, and in truth it just doesn't offer enough in terms of a return comparative to other dungeons on this list to warrant coming any higher than 5th. In 4th, we're going to have Hellfire Ramparts. Now, Hellfire Ramparts has actually got quite a lot going for it in terms of its gold farm. First off is obviously the fact that the mobs are the lowest level of any dungeon, with it being the first dungeon of the expansion, meaning that it's not all that difficult to get around these mobs with your pathing. You can even do this earlier than level 70 if you should so desire to do so, and it is going to be very consistent. Now that is because the amount of money you're going to make here is actually going to be quite limited. There is pickpocketing available in this dungeon like there is in the vast majority, but it's not going to give you very much of a return, and a lot of the packs are going to have to be skipped from pickpocketing perspective simply because of the presence of lots of mobs in this dungeon that can see through stealth. What you're really in this dungeon for are the 2 treasure chests. Now, this is what is one of the biggest perks for Ramparts, in the fact that the 2 treasure chests are always going to be in the same locations, and there's always going to be one locked and one unlocked. So every run is going to be incredibly consistent in what you have to do. Now, the reason it's coming in so low is twofold. Firstly, the low return of the fact there's only the 2 chests available is actually made worse by the fact that these chests are fell iron chests, not adamantite, meaning that they are not going to contain the same level loot as you might get in some of the other higher level dungeons, most notably being in the form of the BOEs being somewhat lower level and less valuable. Beyond that, you are, to my understanding, also at a lower likelihood of being able to get some of the better, more common drops in the form of things like the blue jewel crafting uncut gems. These are actually going to give you quite a good return for a lot of these dungeons, and that's going to make up a lot of the money that you make, and the fact that you're going to get less of them doing this means that it's going to come lower in the list than some of the ones that are to come from this point. The absolute worst thing, however, is that when I'm doing this filming to get the footage for you to demonstrate, I am on a character who is not particularly well geared, but I am level 70 and I do have a few Karazhan pieces. I'm certainly not freshly dinged in all greens, but I'm far from being exceptionally geared, and I am level 70, and yet you will see that I have to speed up this footage quite dramatically because of the amount of time that I have to spend waiting for cooldowns in order to take multiple attempts per pack that I have to kill in order to be able to loot these chests. The more geared that you get, the easier this is going to become. Perhaps you're going to be able to save a cooldown, then use it on the next round on the same pack between vanishes, or maybe you're going to be able to take out a pack entirely if you've got the right talent build for extra avoidance, or if perhaps you've just got enough gear that you can just power through it, then this is going to mitigate the amount of time having to spend per run. However, when I was getting the footage, this was the longest run I had by far because of the amount of time I had to wait in order to get my cooldowns to be able to kill the mob packs surrounding the chests. Now in at number 3 we're going to have slave pens, and this is because of slave pens being something that would appear at first glance to be quite a good option, but in actuality I found it to be quite a restrictive farm comparative to a lot of others. First of all, I thought it was going to be a fantastic farm because of the fact that it is one that is very easy to navigate. There are very few mobs that can see through stealth, and everything's very low level, and it's a very open dungeon. So that is absolutely true, and it's definitely a farm that you can do while not paying very much attention and watching something on your second monitor like I like to do. However, the returns here are kind of awful. And that's because you have to be very fortunate with the location for the spawn points for gathering nodes, which are going to make up the majority of the gold that you're going to get in this dungeon. Of course, there are treasure chests, which there will always be on this list for anything that we're looking at, because treasure chests are going to be the sort of rogue exclusive way of making gold, and they can be very difficult to attain solo. It is dependent upon the spawn points and of course your gear for killing the mobs if they spawn in a bad location. They are present, but they are sometimes going to be fell iron chests, and I'm given to understand they are sometimes going to be adamantite, but that is still not the consistency we would like in terms of getting the high level chest every single time, and they are almost always guarded by mobs. All in all, the real money that you're going to be able to make consistently on every run in slave pens is simply just going to be the pickpocketing gold, which, if that is all you're looking for, there are definitely better options. Like Underbog, which takes our number 2 spot. Now, Underbog is an absolutely fantastic gold farm. I wasn't expecting the same sort of returns as what I got when I went to do my original testing about a week or so ago. And that is because I thought to myself that there wasn't going to be very much in the way of humanoids for the pickpocketing, which makes up the consistent part of the gold during my testing. And while this is true, there are surprisingly more humanoids than I did first think, forgetting about that sort of middle portion of the dungeon with the Naga. However, I actually don't bother with the pickpocketing in this dungeon, or any of them really, because I find the returns to be not really worth it compared to getting more runs in, and I'm someone who just likes to see the big pop gold of getting a blue or purple item. But if you are going that way, it is going to be present for you, but what actually makes the money, in my opinion, in this run, comparative to a lot of the other dungeons, is the presence of sanguine hibiscus. Now this is a herb that in terms of dungeon farming is relatively unique to this dungeon, meaning that it doesn't have an awful lot of competition that are going to get it when they're conducting the farms in some of the more popular locations, meaning it still retains some value. On my server they're still selling for about a gold each, and I'm regularly getting 5 or 6 a run, which is a very consistent amount to be getting on a run that is relatively quick, meaning that you're going to be able to make a decent amount of gold every single time. Beyond that, there is a chest which I'm given to understand is a 100% certainty at the end of the corridor that you get to, which is the first point that you meet the humanoids before you get to the Hydra boss. Every single time that I have done this, the chest has been there. I'm not sure if it is a 100% spawn chance, but it certainly has been for me on the 5 or 6 runs that I have done of this dungeon so far, meaning that that is another guaranteed source of extra income. Beyond that, there are a lot of mining nodes available to you. Herbalism, I'm given to understand what spawns in here isn't particularly high value, but if you do have mining, then there is a real high potential for gold for you as well. And unlike a lot of other dungeons, the spawn points are almost all safe to get, which is a massive perk because it's going to add that consistency in terms of being able to make every single run be very consistent for you, which is something that's greatly underappreciated in gold farming. Now in at number 1 we're gonna have Mana Tombs. Now Mana Tombs is an absolutely insane gold farm, and that is the reason it's going to come in at number 1 when, quite frankly, Underbog was so deserving of a number 1 spot, and the only reason it's not got there is because Mana Tombs has set the bar so very high. Going straight into the dungeon and its pros, you're going to notice the fact that almost every mob is humanoid. You can pickpocket everything in this dungeon apart from the bosses, the big purple elementals, and the mana worms. That's a lot of consistent gold. Beyond that, you're going to have 2 chests at least per run, which are almost all going to be attainable. Some of them are certainly going to be more difficult than others, and you may find yourself wanting to wait until you've got a bit more gear to get some of the more difficult spawn locations, but they are pretty much all going to be attainable if you have the time and desire to do so. Similarly, all of the mining nodes in there are going to be of a similar disposition in that you are going to be able to get them with any degree of gear available to you, providing that you use the right tactics and also the right level of desire to get them in terms of your time to gold management. Now, I'm not saying they're all worth getting, but it is certainly possible, and the absolute kicker for me that's putting this up in number 1 is just how accessible and how quick these runs are. The vast majority of people now at level 70 will have their hearth set to Shatrath, and from there it's just simply fly a little bit south, go into the dungeon, fantastic. Beyond that, you're going to complete these runs. I've often found myself doing it in 6-7 minutes, and that's obviously without the pickpocketing. If you want to put the pickpocketing in, you certainly can do, to make the runs a bit longer so you don't lock out. However, personally, I'd rather do 5 or 6 short, heavy gold runs, lock myself out in half an hour, and then go and do something else, because as much as 10-hour farming videos are great that people bring out, not many of us actually sit and farm gold for 10 hours in the real world. Now, beyond that, the absolute kicker as well that puts it into the number 1 spot beyond the one that I already said, is going to be the fact that there is a vendor right outside the door. This is brilliant, meaning that you can do an awful lot of runs, get yourself locked out, and then vendor everything that you want to do, leave your character there, log back in another half an hour, and go again without having to go anywhere. This is absolutely fantastic and means that you can do this, let's say you did this 5 or 6 times a day, without ever having to hearth as long as you started with empty bags. This is an unbelievable gold farm and by far and away my pick for number 1. But that's going to about wrap it up for me, guys. I do hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do let me know down below and consider subscribing to the channel. But for now, guys, thanks for watching and I hope to see you in the next one. Later!